Good morning, everybody. We will call the work session for February 1st, 2020 to order. Item 2.1.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Ratify and confirm the city manager's approval of the third allocation of coronavirus relief funds distributed by the Florida Housing Corporation. Mr. Lane.
Thank you. Chuck Lane, Economic Development Housing Department. In 2020, we received two allocations of coronavirus relief funds totaling $634,546. We use these funds to provide financial assistance to Clearwater residents who had fallen behind on rent or mortgage payments and utility bills due to hardships brought on by the pandemic. This funding came from the federal CARES package and was distributed by the Florida Housing Finance Corporation. Florida Housing served as the regulatory authority overseeing the program statewide. Florida Housing told grantees all along that if a local government expended all of the funds and there was a need for more funding to assist its community, more funding would be available upon request. Among the requirements of the program, we had to expend the funds by December 30th. On December 10th, we felt we were close to having enough people in the application queue to roll through the remaining funds, so we put out the notice that the city would no longer take applications after December 15th. Well, that notice got people's attention, and we received a flurry of applications, far more than we could fund with the available funds. So we made a recommendation to the city manager to request additional funds from the state in the amount of $400,000 with the understanding that we would return any unused funds to the state. This was a quick decision, so we weren't able to gain council approval prior to accepting the funds. Our goal was to process every application so all eligible applicants were assisted. This may sound simple, but it was a monumental effort. 5 library employees joined the Economic Development and Housing Department temporarily, and our reliance on the Finance Department increased quite a bit. Everyone stepped up, and this interdepartmental effort was a success. When the program closed on December 30th, the team had sorted through more than 1,700 applications, expended $845,562 in assistance payments, and an additional $84,556 in administrative costs. This all helped to provide a financial answer to 235 Clearwater families. We returned $104,427 to the state. I think the entire team should be very proud of what they accomplished. We're working hard right now to stand up a similar program using assistance from CDBG funds. Our plan is to partner with a third party to administer that program. So I'll take questions, please.
Mr. Lane, I just want to commend you and all the staff for all the work that you've done and how it's really helped people through this time. I know it hasn't been easy, and it was in addition to all the normal work that everybody does, so I think we need to recognize that fact. Any questions for Mr. Lane?
No.
Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, I was going to echo the mayor's comments as well about, helping the 248 Clearwater families, and I know how hard you all worked. I have a question about the amount of money that we had to return. So in our agenda documents, it said we had to return $95,000 because is it my understanding that we couldn't spend it quickly enough by that December 30th?
That's really what it comes down to. When we asked for the $400,000, it was a guess.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to know how many applications would be approved and what that amount would be. And what we did is we overestimated because we wanted to make sure that anybody that put in an eligible application that we were able to fund. So we knew we were going to have to return funds. And that December 30th deadline was very tight. Typically with these kind of grant funds, you have a lot of time to spend the money. That was not the case here. This was a very, very sharp deadline that we had to meet.
So there's no way we can ask for that money back that we've returned?
Program's over. It's closed. We have additional funds now with CDBG. We have about $1.4 million. We're going to try to stand up a rent program and fund some public services out of that as well.
Did that money go back to the state or the county that was?
Well, it's federal money, and it was funneled through the state, so we had to return it to the state, but I believe that's going to go back to the Treasury, or there'll be a different program that the state will come up with. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, but that money goes back into a pool that will be used to help people like we've helped in
It's
December?
it's part of the CARES package, so
Okay.
yes, I
It'll
have,
stay there? Okay. Okay. Thanks.
okay.
Other questions or comments? Consent?
Yes.
2.2.
Ratify and confirm approval of a management agreement between the City of Clearwater and the Greater Clearwater Regional Chamber of Commerce, DBA Amplify Clearwater, to provide visitor information services as the Clearwater Beach Visitor Information Center for the period February 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2025, at a cost not to exceed $317,265, and authorize appropriate officials to execute same. Ms. Sanders.
Thank you. Denise Sanderson, Economic Development and Housing. This is a continuation from last council meeting. Recall, Councilmember Beckman asked the question about the utilities that were being provided on the site and who was going to be fiscally responsible for those. We did some investigation along with Amplify Clearwater and discovered that they have been paying water and sewer over the past many, many years, and that electricity is actually being paid for by the City of Clearwater. It is not separately metered. And so we have redlined, and you'll see a redline document in your packet. We've redlined that change in the scope of work, identifying those responsibilities specifically. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Sanderson? Thank you for researching all that, and the good question from Councilmember Beckman. Councilmember Beckman, you have further questions?
I just have a couple of comments. So I had a conversation with Ms. Sanderson earlier about this to get clarification. And one thing I just want to be transparent about is, so we have a agreement with Amplify Clearwater to operate our visitor center, and we are paying for their electricity because we don't have a separate meter to that little building. And it just, and this is not anything personal about Amplify or anyone else, but when you have a lease agreement and all your utilities are included in that lease agreement, it doesn't lend itself to, more conservation. And I know it's a tiny building, but if I've got free, heating and air conditioning, I'm not quite as concerned about my thermostat if I'm not writing a check. But that's just, it's such a minuscule amount. And I understand it's about $100 or so a month, for electricity for that little visitor center. But as I will say again, as I say frequently, we need some city buildings with solar on them. And that little building, looks like it might accommodate 4 solar panels. It's great for tourism to see that we have energy efficiencies, that we're taking care of this environment. That's where our tourists are going. It is incredibly beautiful there. And what better place than the Amplify building, the visitor center, to communicate that to residents, that wow, they do care about the environment. Look at what they're doing. They're green, ecotourism and all that stuff. So just wanted to, take another opportunity to put that in there, that it would be good to see it there on that building or have it investigated. But I'm glad Amplify is going to be there, cheering them on.
Mr. Horn?
Yes, Mayor and Council, our partners like Amplify Clearwater and other partners we have do understand our desire for energy conservation. So even though, you may not see any of that memorialized in any kind of agreement, I just want to assure you that our partners, value the same kinds of things that we do. And then as it relates to the solar, I think it is clear to us that as we move forward, those opportunities are explored. I think in the case of BVIC, I think our focus has been to do what has been quite successful with us. And so I understand your constant reminder about solar. I think we all have heard that many times.
I know, but we don't have any, and, I just want to keep beating the drum.
Well, I mean, again, I think you ought to look at your peers, and see if there's a,
Yeah.
I'm happy to explore it. I want to understand how much it would cost to put on that building and what the benefits would be and the payback would be. So, everything I hear is if we're going to do it, do it in a location where we can get critical mass rather than installations on every structure, unless the main purpose is symbolic. But I'd like to hear, task staff with finding out how much it would cost and how many panels could be on the visitor center and how long the payback would be. I'm happy to explore that. I think it would be a good exercise because instead of speculation, we might actually have some data that would drive our decisions. So I know Councilmember Beckman would support that. I don't know if the other three council members would support it. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, and I know we've been talking about this a long time, and actually before you even got here, and I've had some experience with solar. When I really researched it, the ROI was so far out. I know that was 5 years ago. I'd like an update on that because I know that every year we make advancements and maybe the ROI isn't so far out now. But I do believe in the symbolism, and I think if we're going to do something, I was for the Imagine Clearwater doing something there because it shows, showing the developers and really the world that we do care about it. So it would be a good thing. I'm for that.
Well,
You
there's
know,
other
looking at
buildings
the,
though that are adjacent, that are
Yeah.
actually more appropriate.
Yeah,
You could put it on the entire pavilion, which actually has square footage.
yeah.
And
I agree that to put a small building and put a couple of panels up there probably is not going to be as effective. But that's something we could research and see what what that is now. So I'd be for that.
But I'd like to know, other buildings there, but I'd also like to know just the pavilion. Because I can bet what the result is, but I'd like to know.
Okay, give us some time to do that.
Okay.
Well, and I also, and I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. Make sure, when you're researching putting solar panels on a roof, one of the things you have to take into consideration is what is the life expectancy of the existing roof. It doesn't make sense to put solar panels on a roof that's only got 2 more years before you're going to have to replace it because all you're doing is adding to the cost of that new roof because you've got to remove the panels,
Reinstall.
put the new roof on and reinstall. So it's an added expense if the roof has, a limited lifespan left. If it's a fairly new roof, then you're not having to address that expense.
Councilmember Beckman?
Well, that's a valid concern. I would say that the solar panels that we have on our roof, my townhome, comes with one removal and reapplication as part of the contract. It's their standard operating procedure because the life of those panels is over 20 years. So that's kind of, and it depends on what group you go with. The other thing I would say is if we're going to, I think, my understanding is that there is always a return on investment with solar. It depends on what that time frame is, but you will save money with solar. You will save money. First of all, you're going to save carbon emissions immediately, but you will save money. And then the other thing is, I think when we get quotes, we need to understand where we're starting at. We need to understand that municipalities should not be paying more than $2 a kilowatt hour. And so when we get these quotes, let's look at what surrounding municipalities have contracted for, and we better make sure that we're at that lowest number or lower when we get our quotes. So that's important to me. You can't just get a quote from anybody. You got to know what those other municipalities are paying, and please don't let us get quotes that are more than that.
We've had that conversation.
Consent?
Yes.
3.1. Thank you, Ms. Sanderson.
Authorize the award of invitation to bid 10-21 liquid propane gas tanks to Quality Steel Corporation of Cleveland, Mississippi, and Michael LLC, DBA RE Michael Company, LLC of Glen Burnie, Maryland, in the cumulative annual not to exceed amount of $250,000 for the initial term of February 1, 2021 through January 31st, 2022, with 2 one-year renewal options, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. McGinnis.
McGinnis. Good morning, Tony McGinnis, Clearwater Gas System. In December, we solicited bids for propane tanks, bid number 10-21. There was 3 providers that bid on this. We, with purchasing, agreed that 2 of them were responsive and competitive. Quality Steel will be our provider for ASME tanks, which is the 120, the 250, the 500, and 1000. And then the Michelle Company, which is our DOT tanks, 200s and 420s. The contract period is from February 1st, 2021 through January 31st, 2022. And I'm here for any questions.
Questions? Councilmember Beckman.
It's just a comment, because this was the first agenda item that came up with bids. And I was just hoping that when we see items before us that have a bid format and with a tabulation sheet like the Excel sheet, that we can have some uniformity in the contractors that are bidding and the top tabs. Like, can we have, and this is like across departments, so can we have the name, the address, maybe contact information, and if they are a DBA, that's indicated consistently in the same place. Sometimes it's at the last page of a bid, and sometimes it's up where the name of the company is. So for me, I just think a uniformity would be appreciated. I know it's not a big deal, but it's just that uniformity would be helpful to me.
Mr. Horn.
Well, we'll take that under advisement.
Okay.
Other questions? Consent?
Yes.
3.2.
Approve changes to the Clearwater Gas System utility rates to become effective for all gas bills and services rendered on or after March 1, 2021, and pass the appropriate ordinance on first reading. Mr. Warrington.
Thank you, Mayor and Commission. This is Chuck Warrington, Executive Director now
You can take that off here.
of the Clearwater Gas System. This is a request to approve new gas rates to become effective March the 1st and to pass ordinance 9433-21 on first reading. As you know from our earlier one-on-one meetings with you, our base rates and service charges were last adjusted in November of 2014, 6 years ago. We used the respected utility rate consultant, Raftellus, and worked closely with finance on this evaluation. Jay Ravens, our finance director, actually led this effort, and he will walk you through a summary of the consultant findings and our recommendations. Then Jay and I will be happy to respond to any questions you might have. Jay?
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, Mayor and Council members. Jay Ravens, Finance Director. As Chuck indicated, I'd like to briefly review the results of the recently completed gas rate study, which the consultant has reviewed with each of you previously. The city hired Raftellus to conduct the gas utility rate study in December 2019 via a competitive RFP process. Raftellus has the largest public sector utility rate consulting practice in the nation and was chosen particularly for their experience with natural gas utilities. Staff has been working with Raftellus during most of calendar 2020 on an extensive review of the gas system's customer base, usages by customer class, rates, operating and capital needs, financial history, and financial forecasts. The ultimate goal of the rate study is to adjust rates as necessary to provide financial sustainability for the gas utility, to provide competitive, fair, and equitable rates to natural gas customers across customer classes that adequately fund operating expenses and capital needs, including proactive maintenance of the infrastructure, while providing a reasonable and defensible rate of return on investment to Clearwater taxpayers. All the while maintaining minimum reserve levels and debt service coverage requirements. Key results of the rate study include, first, that current rates on the whole are sufficient to meet operating capital and debt needs for the next 5 years, while maintaining reserve levels and providing a reasonable return on investment to the taxpayers. Reserves are drawn down over the 5-year period so that we're near the minimum in 5 years. But we will be continually monitoring financial results, including conducting formal rate studies every 2 years, and will recommend adjustment of rates as necessary. The gas system's projected reasonable return on investment is on the low end of the range for regulated natural gas utilities per Raftellus, but we feel that is appropriate for a municipal utility and an adequate return for the city and its taxpayers. A second major finding of the rate study was an inequity between commercial and residential customers, with commercial customer classes effectively subsidizing the residential customer class. Per Raftellus, commercial costs represent only 28% of total costs of service, while commercial revenues total 52% of revenues. Conversely, residential costs represent 72% of total costs, but their revenues only account for 48% of total revenues. Raftellus attributes much of this to an inadequate fixed charge or availability charge for residential single-family customers. The consultant recommends a $4 increase from $12 to $16 per month for residential single-family customers at this time to reduce the inequity. Commercial commodity rates will be reduced proportionately to the residential increase to have a neutral effect on total gas system revenues. The $4 increase in the monthly base fixed charge represents a 12% increase in the average residential bill, assuming 15 therms as the average, and a 7.5% increase in the average winter bill during peak usage. However, it should be noted that the resulting average residential monthly bill of $37.50 per month is only 55 cents more than it was in 2014 when the current rate ordinance was adopted. The average bill was $36.75 in 2014 versus an estimated $37.30 with the $4 increase. This represents a less than 1% annual increase, actually 0.24% annually, over the 6-year period. The city's rate study consultant, Bart Krebs with Raftellus, is available by phone at this time, and along with Chuck and I, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Is he on now? Okay. Councilmember Bunker.
Listen, I appreciated the one-on-ones that we had on this. And you folks did a good job of explaining to us why it seems like more of the burden is being put on individuals instead of businesses. Could you kind of briefly explain why that change is being made?
I think I'll respond first. I think historically, publicly owned utilities like ourselves, who answer to the citizens, have put more burden on the commercial class than they have the residential class. That's, I think, classic. You'd see that in any other municipal utility around and whatever. That doesn't mean, though, that it shouldn't shift. And in fact, you know, we've run into over time challenges from some of our commercial customers, particularly the ones that are on the borders of Tico Peoples Gas and whatever, that our rates are higher than their rates. Interestingly enough, they just finished a rate study, and they increased their commercial rates to a level that's fairly close to our decrease in the commercial rates. So we're getting closer on commercial rates, which is heartening to me because that's the complaint we get. But I think that's the basic reality of it is municipal utilities have typically given a break to the residential customers.
Other question? Do you want to add to that?
I would just add that also have to take into account, we've asked the rate study consultant for objective facts. And that's what they're presenting us with, is based on the objective facts. we've got residential that's being heavily subsidized by commercial. So they're just, and this isn't an attempt to fix that in one fell swoop. This is just a small step towards reducing that inequity between the two. One that they felt might be politically acceptable at this point in time versus a more drastic solution.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say again that even though the rates are going to be going up slightly for residential to balance that, I mean, the Clearwater residents get a benefit out of that because they are the stockholders of, I mean, it comes back to them through money that you give the city. So and that part of it probably would be a good thing if we ever really want to know what that benefit is. But I mean, the last time you presented Clearwater a check, it was a pretty good sized check that goes into general fund and pays for a lot of things that our, residents enjoy. So.
Let me ask you something. I mean, I know that the consultant believes that we need to bring our reserves down, that we're a little bit high, and those come down over the next several years. 2025, I think, is where we kind of get within the range of what they hoped. And I know that this is revenue neutral to the city, right? But I mean, it strikes me still it's not cost neutral to our customers. And so I was wondering if we could do $2 this year and $2 next year to get to the $4. That would get obviously it would get our reserves down faster because we would be subsidizing, but it doesn't make quite as large a hit. And unfortunately, I know $2 a month, $24 for a year doesn't sound like much, and it probably isn't, but it's a crummy time for some people out there. Some people are doing fine. But it was just something, as I went through the entire presentation again, it struck me that might be a possibility. And I don't know if the consultant wants to speak to that, or Mr. Warrington, or...
I'll speak to it from a financial perspective. Given the fact that we're going to be doing another rate study in 2 years, and we're determining at that point where we are, because all of this is based on estimates currently.
Sure.
And they won't be correct. Actual will be different. That's a reasonable compromise in my opinion, that financially is very doable in that we will be reviewing it in a couple of years. It's not a long-term solution for the next 5 years.
In order to be revenue neutral, though, in order to do the residential adjustment to $2, we'd have to make an adjustment to the commercial and not decrease their rates by 4 cents, but rather 2 cents, in order to be equitable and not lose financial standing. It's certainly doable.
Unless you draw down reserves.
Yeah, but the plan has been to draw down the reserves over the 5 years, and of course, I would tell you that we're going to do all we can to be better than what the plan is. We've done that consistently, and so we may well do better than that over time. But we can't. The study is based on objective financial numbers.
Yeah, and we do get down to minimum reserve levels in 5 years. My guess is that when the rate study consultants factor this in, it would show us being below the minimum at the end of the 5 years. That's not a cardinal sin at this point in time. If we decided to go with those rates, knowing that we're doing another rate study in 2 years, we have the ability to adjust rates before we get to that deficit level in 5 years.
Okay. Councilmember Beckman and then Councilmember Hamilton.
I agree with the mayor. That was one of my questions, is can we phase it in and have a $2 increase per year? I have a couple of questions about the redlined ordinance, so the changes that we're proposing. And one of what was, can we phase in this rate? And then on page 6, it looks like people who live in apartments pay more in a minimum monthly bill, right? And are those, would those be a large apartment building where there would be 1 meter and an apartment owner can choose to, have a flat rate for gas for their individuals? Because I can't imagine if you have, because it goes based on therms used, 100,000 more or more therms for a large multifamily residential rate and things like that. Is that because it's not realistic to have individual gas meters if I've got, right?
That's exactly it. These are multi-unit businesses, which look almost like a commercial customer.
And so, do they pass those on to each individual apartment dweller? I mean, or is that just up to them how they're gonna do that?
It's up to them, but I mean, I would assume they recover their costs.
That would be $25 divided by however many residents they have.
Right, or on the next page, it goes up to like 95 and, okay. And then I had a question on page 19.
What page?
19. And so this is about the effect of energy conservation measures on usage classes. And I found it interesting, the language said, should the customer install a more energy efficient appliance or appliances while a customer of Clearwater Gas, and this causes their usage to drop, such that their usage class would change, blah, blah, blah. How do you know if somebody installs a more energy efficient appliance or appliances?
Well, typically, we're talking about a new installation where we've got the engineering plans for the building.
Okay. But it says install a more energy efficient appliance or appliances while they're already a customer of Clearwater Gas, and then their usage drops, then you guys want to recover that, the savings that was realized. And so, if someone replaces their hot water heater with a heat pump that's more efficient, I want to make sure that we're incentivizing that.
Well, they're still going to be a residential rate. They're going to save on their energy charges. Again, I would point out that currently the residential customers are saving 68% versus electric. But if they find another improvement like solar or whatever, that's done every day. We don't go out and police customers to see if they've changed something like that out.
But let's say they go from a tank gas water heater to a tankless, where it's not keeping the water hot all the time, it's on demand. I think that kind of goes more to Councilmember Beckman's question.
You may know that, right, if you're going in and doing different piping, right, or something.
I think if you look at the last sentence of that paragraph, this is actually intended to help the resident not be adversely affected by keeping them in a more favorable usage class by adding that back.
Okay, I read that sentence too, but I just couldn't make sense of the paragraph that, the sentences above it. I didn't see how it all fit together. But, okay, and then I have a question on page 22 as well. Again, this has to do with this energy conservation adjustment, a rider. And the question that goes from this natural gas rate schedule from 14 to 18, one of my questions is, has data shown that the cost to this utility for administering or providing the energy conservation programs has increased this specific amount? So how did you get from 14 to 18? Do we need more staff? Is it more, time? What's going on there with that?
It's actually a moving target. We have that energy conservation adjustment clause. That number has gone as high as 26 last year. And it's been decreasing. We in fact, part of this rate study, we critically looked at a number of those aspects and removed some things. So, yes, from 6 years ago, it was 14 at that point in time in November of 2014. Today, it's 18. But like I say, it was up to 26. We've cut it back down, and we think it's moving in the downward direction. A lot of the things, the drivers on those have been decreasing over the last couple of years, and so my bet is next time we're before you, you're going to see that number lower.
So is it staff time? I mean, what's that money going towards?
It's
More-
going to reimburse builder incentives for appliances. It's going to energy conservation advertising programs and whatever. We showed you a breakdown, a sheet of the breakdown of those expenses.
And then also, is on the second big paragraph right under that, I have a question about if energy efficiencies are going on, is the gas company going to charge more to recoup that loss? So it says, these ECAs, energy conservation adjustments, will normally be reviewed annually in October and may be adjusted upward or downward from time to time with the approval of the city manager or designee based on actual and projected energy conservation program costs and projected consumption levels in order to recover the total cost of applicable gas system programs, including energy conservation incentive payments as well as the applicable labor and other costs. So if we have energy conservation efforts, you're still going to recoup, you want to keep the money steady, correct? And not, and we're not going to see a decrease in revenue based on energy efficiencies that people might be taking,
So-
businesses.
We expense real expenses that attribute to this, like builder incentive payments and things like that. We don't calculate into this the losses of revenue from like a tank, when somebody changes from a tank water heater to a tankless water heater and they now use 80 fewer therms a year. We don't recover that. That's in our overall rates, and that's just when we do a rate study, we contemplate what those levels are. So the customer benefits with that directly. Any energy conservation program they do, if they put solar in or whatever, they would directly benefit by whatever the drop in usage would be.
And then I had just on page 25. So on page 25, we're talking about some miscellaneous rates listed in this section may be reviewed and adjusted from time to time by the gas executive director with the approval of the city manager or designee. And I would just, suggest that it seems here that they don't need to go to council, to adjust these rates. And could we at least get informed when that happens? Could council at least get informed? Because if people come to us and ask, what's going on with the gas bill?
Sure. And I would tell you that we didn't use that clause for the last 6 years, so we've kind of let cost increase while we haven't increased the cost of the service. This is making up for that for now. I would tell you that that was negligent on their part, but we should monitor those more often, and then I think that's a good point. If we make that adjustment, then we'll make sure we pass that along so that adjustment's been made.
Okay. And I think 31. Okay, so page 31, there's a paragraph that I found confusing. And, I meant to say this from the start. So I know I ask a lot of questions about and I am not a person to micromanage or get way down in the weeds. But I do care about energy. I care about saving money. But I'll tell you, my dad was chairman of the Public Service Commission in Michigan, and so he's a go-to person for me to help understand some things and look at things critically. So I'm very grateful to have that resource and use it. And then he also, after he was retired, he was asked to serve as a non-voting member on a public-owned utility, a city-owned utility. So he's got some different experience that I use to formulate my understanding and questions. And I just feel like I'm here to look out for the residents and gain an understanding as I vote on these things. So on page 31, and this is my last one, this paragraph B, it says Clearwater Gas is to offer a customer, potential customers who currently use currently uses or has access to an alternate energy source, all right, so probably what would be an alternate energy source that we have available here, and has the capability to use this alternate energy source, or is otherwise deemed to be a threat to discontinue gas usage, a rate level adequate to acquire or preserve the gas load, provided that such a rate application, profit margin, that such a rate application, a profit margin to capital investments to serve such a customer. But anyway, you know, so my question here is, the paragraph is a little confusing. We want to give discounts that will retain that customer that is thinking about moving to an alternate energy source. Is that what we're doing?
That's exactly what we're doing. You know, versus electric, versus propane, versus any other energy source, we would reduce the cost to that customer accordingly to retain their load.
Yeah, and so it's a threat of leaving. And so what struck me about that is we have multiple goals in our city, and one of our goals is to reduce our pollution, to reduce our carbon footprint. But here we're saying, and even on our trucks, it says cleaner natural gas. And so it's cleaner, and that we know that we are working towards reducing our pollution. But with this paragraph, we're saying we're going to hold on to these people if they threaten to leave.
Councilmember, the last sentence in that paragraph was actually added to keep it from, to keep this rate from being applicable if the alternative energy source provides for less greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one of the standards that's in here. If it's, say it's solar, for instance. If it's solar, then this rate would not kick in because there are less greenhouse gas emissions.
So if they chose coal or something, then it would.
Yeah, then that would be different. This is something that we talked about with Sheridan as well, and she was supportive of.
Okay. What would be an alternate energy source that would have the capability that you feel
Typically it's
threatened of?
propane or electric.
Okay, but electric reduces our greenhouse gases.
Yeah,
They're burning natural gas to get the electric.
And
Some forms of alternate energy, that I would say, how you get your electric.
In Florida right now, they're burning natural gas. We don't have a nuclear plant that Duke uses anymore because they shut down Crystal River. So if you're getting electricity, it's being produced by a natural gas plant.
But Duke has solar fields that we've signed on for.
They haven't, none of them are in existence yet.
Okay. Well, I appreciate those clarifications.
thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
I'm going to go back to the cost neutral aspect of the whole project. What effect does this have on the reserves if we implement it in a two-stage, half, you know, the residential goes up half, you know, $2 this year and $2 next year, and the commercial comes down half this year and half next year? Does that keep the reserve forecast basically where it is, or does it have
We
what
would have to
effect
get that
does it have?
number, and we need to get that number to assist you in that decision, unless Bart has anticipated that question and done the math in the background. Bart, any feel for what, did we lose him? What implementing half of the customer, or the residential reduction for $2, increase of $2, and implementing the entire 4-cent decrease in commercial commodity charges?
Yeah, we can get that number. I mean, you know, all things being equal, we would need to do, you know, a commensurate. We were gonna just go $2 and then to approximately 2 cents on the commercial rate to keep it neutral, but we can get that number on the rate.
Can you get it by Thursday?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that one?
Can you get it by Thursday?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll expect to hear it on Thursday.
I'm assuming then we build that into the rates that would show March 1st this year doing one thing, March 1st next year.
We'll have two options
Two
ready to
options.
approve.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Horn?
Two things. One, and Jay and Chuck, you can correct me, but at one point, we had significant reserves in the gas system. And as such, that funded the new facility. And I also don't think we ever intend for those reserves to be as robust again
Right.
going forward. So I just for an FYI for our new council members.
Right.
The second thing is, please address the policy issue of providing subsidizing the residential customer. Is this something that you all agree as a matter of policy that we should do or not?
If we were in a normal time, I would not be proposing it. It is really a function of where we are in the economy.
Okay, so at what point then do we shift, or, I mean, is this a conversation you want to have going forward when conditions change? I'm just trying to acquire some understanding as to how our director should manage that.
Well, I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, the economy is ever changing. I actually deal with it probably more than anyone on this dais, from reading things and everything else. I do not know where we'll be in 6 months, based upon COVID, based upon policy up in Washington, policy in the state of Florida. So, I mean, my crystal ball is cloudy at best. I think, though, within a year, if I had to bet, or you put a gun to my head, I think we're probably going to be much closer to normalcy, because hopefully everyone who desires to have a vaccination will have had a vaccination. And I think the business cycle will be somewhat back to normal. I think we still have economic issues that we're going to have to face. Over the last couple of years, we've spent an inordinate amount of money at the federal level, and we're going to eventually have to pay for that. There's probably going to be policy decisions that are made, and those may affect the overall economy. But, I mean, for right now, I could shift the responsibility from the commercial, from the residential to the commercial for an extra year. I also believe we could run down the reserves faster. And if we're doing a rate study in 2 years, then we'll make the decisions on how we're going to compensate for that. I mean, I understand we've always had a policy of, being very careful with reserves, but you and I can hearken back to 2008 and 9, where thank goodness the city was in a very good financial position in relationship to other government entities. And at that point, we did something we don't normally do. We took some money from reserves, and we made certain that we weren't increasing taxes on our residents. And we hope and prayed that the economy would improve, and in fact it did. So, I don't know if that clarifies things, but that's kind of my perspective.
Okay, others, you all support that?
Well, I mean, I come from both sides of this one. I mean, I know what we pay for gas over at the Palm Pavilion. I know what I pay at my home for the gas, and it's anything. If I can save money in my business, we're always looking for opportunities, and we're appreciative for where we can save money there. $4 a month at home, not a huge number, but I know in these times for some people it's significant. So, given that, I like the graduation of the if we can do half this year, half next year, I think that's a good approach. But I'll look forward to seeing the numbers on Thursday.
Other comments? Councilmember Bunker?
Have we traditionally been charging or subsidizing the commerce with, or subsidizing individuals with the commercial?
Commercial side has been subsidized.
So we've, traditionally done that. Has there been a big difference in that price ratio over the years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the numbers that I presented, it's very significant.
What, 28 versus,
Currently,
49% of the
residential
cost?
costs represent 72% of the total costs, but the revenues collected from them only account for 48% of the total revenues. So they're 72% of total costs, but they're only paying for 48% of the costs. So they're getting a good deal. Commercial is subsidizing them so that their rates stay that low.
I'm sitting here trying to do the math in my head, and it's a bad idea. But I think you also don't lose sight of the fact that in the final wash, the money that Clearwater Gas gives back to the city of Clearwater every year benefits every single resident in Clearwater. So, what is it, what'd you give us last year?
close to 5, wasn't it?
Yeah, 4 or 5. And you divide that by 110,000 people, that's a pretty good little chunk. So,
And that's even for citizens in Clearwater that don't have gas.
exactly. That's even for citizens who don't have gas. So it is, I want Clearwater Gas to be a very strong economic engine because everybody in Clearwater benefits when that happens, so.
Councilmember Beckman?
I'm okay with businesses absorbing a little more of the cost. I think we have to remember that you guys are the only game in town. You don't have a competitor here. And I would, it may be competitive around the perimeter of your service area, but, if people want gas, that's where they go, is Clearwater Gas, right? And so there's that thing, and, and yeah, and I appreciate that Clearwater Gas gives back to the community a lot, things, but it's part of their advertising and marketing, and that's, part of the money that goes into the pool that you're collected, and then it gets funneled into advertising and marketing, and it does benefit a lot of people, but there are a lot of extra perks, like, that are there, so that's for another discussion.
Well, I don't think Councilmember Hamilton was talking about advertising and marketing and sponsorship for not-for-profits. He's talking about money that's going back to the general fund.
Okay,
Exactly.
good.
So that's actually going into our coffers and means we don't raise our millage rate.
Their marketing budget is built into their annual plan, and the money that comes to us is not money that was used for marketing.
It's net of all of that.
Exactly.
So, Vice Mayor, do you have anything to add?
No, I think I pretty much presented what I said is what we were all talking about, that you do have a benefit with Clearwater Gas if you're a resident of Clearwater because of the check that you give us every year that goes back to pay for things that all our citizens enjoy. So I think that what the mayor brought up about, starting and incrementally doing it would be good because of this climate we're in. So I would be for that.
Are you clear?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you again on Thursday. Can't wait. 4.1.
Authorize the award of invitation to bid 05-21, sod material and services to Quality Sod and Landscaping Solutions of Tampa, Lyra and Sun Sod, Inc. of Lake Placid, and Tom's Sod Service, Inc. of Clearwater, Florida, for an annual amount not to exceed $300,000, with the option of 2 one-year renewal terms, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Halios.
Morning, Mayor, Council, Jim Halios, Director of Parks and Recreation. The item that we have before you today is our sod contract. As you've seen, it's broken down into 3 options. I'll briefly go over those different options because that allows us flexibility in how we address the sod issues within our parks and athletic fields. Option 1 is where we remove the sod and do a rough grade, and then the vendor will come in, they lay the sod that they provide to us. Option 2 is that they remove the sod and lay the sod, and then option 3 would just be delivery only. That means we take care of everything from soup to nuts. So these 3 different vendors will allow us the flexibility to provide for all the different cultivars of grass that we have within the city. Sometimes when we'll go to one vendor, depending on where they get it at in the state, they can either, there could be an infestation with insects in their sod, so that might not be a procurable sod that we want, or if it's a heavy rain in certain areas, we can't harvest the sod in that area either. So these 3 vendors allow us the flexibility to address any issues as we see them come up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Halios? Councilmember Beckman?
So, again, I'm not here to micromanage, but I'm here to learn. And one of the things I look at when I look at the tabulation bid is, you know, if we have an indication of a women or minority-owned business or disadvantaged business. And we do have one, and so I looked at the bids, and there was, you know, the one that was women and minority-owned business is way expensive, you know, way over what we're deciding to award. And I'm like, what's going on? Why is this so out of whack? And so, you know, I did some investigating and calling and talking to people. And so there were 3 things that were mentioned to me. Number 1 was a concern about, so this is a 1-year contract with an option for 2 one-year renewal terms. So there's a concern about the state passing the federal minimum, or I mean the state minimum wage of $15 and how that might impact a business and their cost for 1, 2, or 3 years in the future. Number 2 was that one of the part of the application minimum requirements was that a entity had to be in operation for a minimum of 5 years. And there's some question about Lira and Sons being a subsidiary, you know, like an offshoot of another Lira company, and that perhaps this one hasn't been in business a full 5 years. You know, that's something that somebody might want to follow up on. The other thing, though, that was mentioned was that we have these guidelines to verify that we're not, federal guidelines, that we are not hiring undocumented citizens. And if a company has E-Verify, that's a cost. So the things that this owner I talked to said, there's a concern about minimum wage, which has nothing to do with, you know, they all have that same concern. A concern about one of the applicants who might not have been in business a full 5 years under that name. The E-Verify, the cost of E-Verify, and also, and I looked through the contract trying to find this, but they mentioned an agricultural bond requirement, that you have to have a bond that will cover at least a month's worth of your expenses, and that's an expense. And so the bottom line was that on that application, these contractors can check, yes, I do E-Verify, or yes, I can attest to this or that or the other thing, and that those are really expenses for people that might have higher bids, and is it a level playing field? So that was part of my conversation I had on Friday with some different contractors with, you know, landscaping stuff. Does that?
You know, that would go to how our procurement process is, and we have ordinances, rules, regulations. So, you know, in order to change those, that's a discussion that's
A different department or whatever, yeah. But it's just part of my learning about, because when I see a contract, you guys, when I'm looking at it, and I see wildly different bids, I'm wondering what's going on here, and, you know, is there a cost to submit a bid, you know, some minimal cost to cover part of our administration to look at and consider a bid? I don't even know that.
The contractor puts time and effort into it because they have to do a takeoff.
Yeah, but not a
make certain.
fee to the city, like a $50 application fee to submit a bid or anything?
No, I mean, I mean, we have a system where we provide information that the bidders, you know, will evaluate and they will give us their bid.
Right,
And that's what we work with. I don't know what is all going on in their minds and how they approach it, but from our perspective, everything's laid out. The playing field is level from that perspective, okay? So, so when we see those variations,
Yeah.
our staff has always wondered, there may even be some conversation. We're trying to get the most responsive, bid.
right.
And so they may have some idea as to why there's such a discrepancy, but we don't spend a lot of time trying to understand why that discrepancy exists. If we're able to evaluate the most responsive bid based on the criteria in the RFP, then that's where we go.
Right, but if part of the RFP is you have to have E-Verify, you have to have an ag bond, you have to have this
Yes.
insurance, it's just check the box and we believe them.
Yes.
And there's no verifying that they actually are doing what they need to do with insurance coverage or operating procedures or things like that.
Now,
Ms. Aiken?
They, of course, do have to provide evidence of insurance.
Yeah.
When contracts are issued, they have to provide certificates of insurance. I would imagine they also have to prove to us that they use E-Verify. It's not, we just don't have you check a box and then we never verify any of that. So they're awarded the contract, they have to give us certificates of insurance.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And as the manager said, they have the opportunity to call us in the time of the bid process and ask questions. But for us to call them and say, you're higher than vendor X, Y, and Z, that really taints the process, and that's
Yeah.
not something that we're going to
Yeah.
be doing.
Yeah, I understand.
Other questions? I have just a couple, Mr. Hallios. So is this the order of who we're going to reach out to?
Primarily, yeah. So we're always going to go to the lowest price vendor first and ask them, to provide that type of sod, that cultivar, based on availability of that and then also availability of their staff to do the job. And then we move down the list based off of that.
Okay, Tom's is the only one in Pinellas County.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons I asked. And their delivery only, is that their choice or our choice to only use them when we're going to do the project soup to nuts, as you said?
That, I'd have to look into that, but they farm their sod out in the middle of the state also. So usually delivery only, I think, is based off of the price that the vendor provides us. So we can look into that also.
Okay. Do these prices extend, for instance, to any of the 3 golf courses, the public golf courses, that operate within the city? Or would they go independently for sod should they need it?
They would go independently for sod should they need it, and I can tell you based on, again, it all goes to square footage, and just the way that we have it set up with the vendors. They usually, golf courses, if they're doing a large amount, they're probably going to get a better price than what we would on, an on-demand thing. But again, it goes to the square footage on what you're going to use.
But they can't piggyback?
No, we traditionally don't do that.
Okay. Consent? All right, item 4.2.
approve a vehicle use agreement between the School Board of Pinellas County, Florida, and the City of Clearwater through August 23, 2021, for the city to utilize Pinellas County school buses at a cost of $1.50 per mile, plus $31 per hour, for an estimated cost of $20,000, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Ms. Clayton.
Good morning. Sandy Clayton, Recreation Division Manager with the Parks and Recreation Department. I'm presenting the annual agreement with the Pinellas County Schools to provide school bus transportation during the summer for our summer camp programs. Now, right now, we're working on our plans for summer camp, and we're not sure if we will be having field trips as part of our summer curriculum. This is going to depend on the overall health of the community and if field trips can be conducted safely. However, I am an optimist, So I'm hopeful that this will be, we will be able to provide safe field trips for our kids this summer. And this agreement will allow us to use school buses for the transportation of for these trips. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Clayton? Consent.
Yeah.
Councilmember Beckman?
Because of COVID, I'm super hopeful too. Do you think we should ask for more buses to space the kids a little more in the buses? Are you figuring that, or will you reduce the field trips, or what are you thinking?
Well, right now, we're planning to reduce the number of kids that we serve, just so keep the pods and the groups smaller. So that will in fact affect how many buses that will
And
be
go
able to
on it,
use.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Consent?
Yep.
5.1. Thank you, Ms.
If I could make, Sandy Freely, if I could just make one comment. You're looking at someone who tries extremely hard to make sure that our recreation programs happen in spite of the pandemic, in spite of any kind of limitation. And so that's a true advocate there, and we do our best to try and make sure that we do things safely, so she can keep these services going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clegg. 5.1.
Approve a proposal by construction manager at Risk Biltmore Construction Company, Inc. of Bel Air, Florida, per continuing contracts RFQ 40-20, in the amount not to exceed $962,973 for the design, fabrication, and installation of Troy System acoustical panels at the District 3 Operations and Training Center located at 2851 McMullen Booth Road, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Chief Law.
Good morning, Council. Dan Slaughter, Chief of Police. So as stated, the Police Department operates a District 3 Operations and Training Center at 2851 McMullen Booth Road. And part of this center includes a firearms training range that's been in place since the early 80s. The range is used by our department for our in-service training, which is all our sworn personnel about 3 to 4 times a year. Our recruit orientation, which occurs as needed based on the number of recruit classes we conduct. SWAT training and other weapons-related training. The environment in which we operate requires a lot of attention to firearms training, and the tolerance for error is obviously zero. In 2017, the department completed a renovation of the range to complete the rotten wood baffling that did not provide the adequate bullet containment that we needed. And it was replaced with concrete walls that do provide an adequate containment system. However, once the 2017 renovations were completed, the department recognized that we had a sound issue and received complaints from some of the neighborhoods. The concrete walls has essentially created a kind of a canyon amplification effect. The 2017 construction project did include some funding for sound mitigation, but the product installed and the manner in which it was installed has not provided adequate sound mitigation. The city manager had directed the police department to work with engineering and evaluate some of the options. So we had an acoustic consultant that evaluated the sound, and also included in part of the development project of the replacement of District 3 Operations Training Center, kind of looked at options that were available to try to address the sound. Troy Acoustics provides a product and a superior product and specializes in range sound mitigation. The Troy Acoustics product provides continuous cover of all the concrete walls, which is something that is not currently in place, and it also provides a buffering zone. Both of those features, as stated, are currently not present. Biltmore Construction is the proposed construction manager at Risk with a maximum price of $962,973. However, the department is not recommending completed the concrete enclosures, which in the proposal have a cost of $161,000. So we don't feel that those would provide any bang for their buck, for lack of a bad pun. And we would anticipate the cost of the project to be under $820,000. We have made efforts. We have purchased suppressors for some of the long rifles and made some efforts to kind of mitigate the noise, but we feel this is necessary to be good neighbors. Be more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the chief? Vice Mayor?
Yeah, with the one-on-ones that we all had, I really appreciated knowing the detail of what you're doing, and I think it's a good plan, to be a good neighbor, and because I don't want to see your training go down any less, and I know you've thought about different places you could take people that would, so I think you're doing the right thing.
Thank you. And your expertise with the information you had on working in sound proof rooms was helpful, so appreciate it, sir.
I mean, I don't think any of us really want to spend the money. Hope that the original construction would have done the trick. But I think this is necessary so that we're good neighbors. I do want people to know that the money for this is not coming from the general fund, but from Penny for Pinellas. A lot of that money is raised through our tourists that come and visit us, thank goodness. So I think that's a good use of that money. Consent?
Well, and I also, not just Penny for Pinellas, but it's also money that was budgeted originally for the East Library at St. Pete College, and that came in under budget. This money was left over, and this is a good way of using it. So my kudos to the finance department, Kayleen and her people for taking care of that.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
So that is on consent 6.1.
Ratify and confirm a legal services agreement and contract between the City of Clearwater and Baker and Hostler LLP to serve as legal counsel on environmental matters for a 5-year period in an amount not to exceed $100,000 and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. DeSico.
Good morning, Council. I'm Joe DeSico, Environmental Specialist with Engineering Department. Environmental Engineering has engaged Baker Hostetler to serve as legal counsel to address environmental conditions at city properties for a number of years. This ratify and confirm item is an oversight due to transitions in staff. This has been corrected to not occur again. Baker Hostetler is currently engaged in DEP closure efforts at a couple of our landfill sites as well as the gas complex. So, any questions?
Any questions? Councilmember Hamilton.
The not to exceed number of $100,000, is that an annual number or is that $100,000 over the next 5 years?
That's 5 years.
Okay,
Consent?
yes.
6.2.
Approve a professional services agreement and work order with Advanced Engineering and Design Incorporated of Pinellas Park, Florida, per request for qualifications 29-20 for Nash Street and Old Clearwater Bay improvements in the amount of $545,789.01, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Johnson.
Morning, Mayor and Council. The subsurface infrastructure in each of these locations is nearing the end of its lifespan, undersized, or unfavorably aligned on private property. As part of this work order, Advanced Engineering will provide construction plans, acquire all required permits, explore grant funding opportunities, provide bidding and construction phase services. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Have we communicated with the neighborhood about what to expect?
Yes. This, specifically the Nash Street, was on our list to resurface in years past, and I didn't think it was appropriate to go and resurface something if we have these types of improvements to make in that neighborhood. So we're in contact with that neighborhood pretty regularly. The Old Clearwater Bay neighborhood, I've been involved in that for 6 or 7 years with residents out there. So, we're continuing to coordinate.
Well, these are always nightmarish whenever we do them. It's great for the neighborhood long-term, but I just want them to be aware of what it's going to be like, so they have expectations. I also want to say I'm proud of Clearwater because we continue to work on things that you don't see necessarily. And some of our surrounding cities are behind the 8 ball on that, and you only find out when something fails. And so I think citizens need to understand that we're staying ahead of the curve on our infrastructure so it doesn't sneak up on us.
And particularly this process of acquiring Advanced Engineering to do 2 separate areas is an efficiency type thing for us to try and keep our programming on track so that we have these projects coming out. And as the residents are paying their stormwater utility fee, we're appropriating those funds to come back to the community.
Thank you. Consent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Council,
Just
I mean,
want to point out,
Mr.
Mr.
Horn.
Johnson, for some reason, your tie is speaking to me. Well done.
Thanks.
6.3.
Approve the conveyance of a distribution easement to Duke Energy Florida LLC DBA Duke Energy for the installation, operation, and maintenance of electric facilities to support Duke's new transformer at State Street Park and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Burzak.
Good morning, Robert Burzak, Real Estate Service Coordinator. The proposed easement will provide Duke Energy property rights necessary to construct and maintain its electrical equipment within the easement to serve the city's State Street Park. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
No.
Consent?
Yes.
All right, items 6.4 and 6.5, I will have to recuse myself from. I have a business relationship with Mr. Crum, so I'm going to turn it over to the Vice Mayor and take advantage of this time to use the restroom.
Okay. All right, agenda item 6.4.
Accept a temporary easement from Crum Properties 2 LLC to the City of Clearwater for ingress, egress, access to certain real property located at 100 South Missouri Avenue and for purposes of completing ground truthing and verification therein. Mr. Burzak.
Mr. Horn, the temporary easement will allow city ingress, egress, access to the property, allow Cardinal as the city's consultant to perform ground truthing activities on the property. City staff recommend approval of the temporary easement.
Any questions?
No, we all get updates from Mr. Horn every week on the Crum property, so I think we're all fully aware of what's going on, so.
All right, everybody okay with consent?
Yes.
Yep. All right, agenda item 6.5.
Approve an appropriation of general fund reserves and a work order to engineer of record Cardinal Inc. in the amount not to exceed $87,888 to complete archaeological excavation at the Crum property, the former site of St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. DeSico.
Good morning again, Joe DeSico, Environmental Specialist with Engineering. The St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery was an African-American cemetery that operated from the early 1900s until the 1940s. Very little information about grave relocation was found after the cemetery was closed. Recent historical review and GPR surveys have indicated that there may be active graves at the site. This excavation is a preliminary effort just to verify the presence of active burials. Any questions?
Any question?
This is excavation, the word always scares me, but this is they've done the ground truthing, correct? This is post-ground truthing.
No, they
Or this
done
is-
the GPR work.
Uh-huh.
So this is for the ground truthing to validate
Okay.
that the image is real.
The images are, they're not gonna be digging it up. This is not the physical digging up, is it? Or it is?
Part of the truthing, I think.
This is they will scrape back.
Okay. And as part of this area, my understanding, part of this area could go out into Missouri Avenue itself.
Correct.
And I think we need to make sure people understand that there could be some traffic maintenance due to that, having to block off some of the one lane or something.
The way that they're focusing the efforts is they're going to areas to cause the least disturbance each time. And if they find something in a certain area, then they'll stop, and then we're going to regroup and talk about the rest of the site.
Okay.
So this is just a preliminary verification.
Good, okay.
This activity does not get you into Missouri Avenue.
Okay.
We're on it.
Good.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah.
Councilmember Beckman?
So I have, full disclosure, I'm a member of the Clearwater North Pinellas NAACP and attend their meetings regularly and have been in a number of meetings where we've had full focus on the St. Matthew's Church property as well as the North Greenwood property. And so when I read the first paragraph under summary, there was, I have a problem with the understanding and the wording. And it's primarily, it says the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery, an African-American cemetery dating to the early 1900s, was once located along Missouri Avenue near Cleveland Street. The cemetery operated at the property until the 1940s, which is exactly what you said. According to records from the time, the cemetery had become inadequate, and the City of Clearwater Council established a new African American burial site at the North Greenwood Cemetery. And so, to me, this is, and I'm just speaking for myself, it's, this is a very sensitive subject, and it goes way back to the 40s and 1900s when they had that church and the cemetery before any of us were here. But I feel that in doing the truthing and finding out if bodies are down there, and then making a decision about what are we going to do if we do find that there's human DNA with the truthing, we need, for me, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for education. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And how are we going to move forward with bodies that are under there, especially when the archaeologists don't recommend moving them? So with that in mind, it was my understanding from a number of presentations that the city wanted to extend Pierce Street, and that St. Matthew's and the cemetery were there in that area, and St. Matthew's was financially vulnerable, whatever, and so that's why the graves were moved and the city purchased St. Matthew's. It was not, so the phrasing that, according to records from the time, the cemetery had become inadequate and the City of Clearwater Council established a new African American burial site at the North Greenwood Cemetery. I read into that, oh, well, the St. Matthew's African American Cemetery became full or something, and then the city council at that time said, hey guys, you seem to be inadequate here, let me relocate you over to North Greenwood. And I don't know that that's an accurate representation of what happened. You know what I mean? And so I think if this is a document that's part of our city record on the agenda and what we're going to vote on Thursday, I think we need to be clear about what happened to precipitate the moving of those graves. Was it really about putting a street in that area, extending a street?
Like it was extending Missouri though, not Pierce.
Oh, okay.
Was it not?
I checked with some members of Clearwater Heights on, over the weekend just to make sure. And, my understanding was Pierce Street was coming through there, but regardless, it doesn't matter about the street. A street wanted to be extended or something. So, I don't know if, legal, I don't know who composed the narrative there or how we might think about changing it to reflect a little more accurately why that happened from the get-go.
Well, I guess I would ask the question, what's your source of information? I mean, we obviously can tell you what our source is. Why is your source, in your opinion, more valid than the source that we're using?
Well, I guess that's a good question. I think I would have to go back and see, once the graves were moved, did the road start to be extended and built and, a retail establishment put on there? And, I mean,
Well,
yeah.
let me approach it this way.
Okay.
I think if there is some question as to the accuracy of some of the information that we're using, we can certainly revisit that and review it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it has any bearing on this agenda item that we're asking you to approve.
No, I want to approve it. I
Okay.
think that's all fine. I just think for public record, as we phrase this and as we discuss it and understand why we, are going forward with it, understanding the background of how this happened. If we get confirmation that there are bodies there, how did bodies get left there and all that? I think we need to be accurate with our understanding of the premise of moving those bodies.
Councilman Hamilton?
Well, I understand you wanting, the public record to be that, but I think part of the problem is the public records from back in those days are so inaccurate that I'm not sure there's a way to, with 100% certainty, have 100% accuracy on how it came to be.
Okay.
So I think, I mean, I want as much accuracy as we can get, but even the records of the day that the city has and everything else don't paint a real clear picture. So I'm not sure how we can clear that up now without, without the right without the information.
But then the phrasing, the cemetery had become inadequate, what does that mean? I mean, that's a judgment from some kind of historical record.
The consultant that we use, I think USF has done quite a bit of research. We can certainly provide clarity, in working with our partners on this, so as to make sure that whatever written record we're using as official records is accurate. We can do that. But like I said, I don't think it bears any on this agenda item at this point.
And my understanding too, that a lot of the graves were unmarked, and I mean, the records weren't there. Council then did what they could to move existing, but we're going an extra step here to try to find some,
Council did not do the relocations on this site. Just Greenwood was the site where council did the relocations. There's no record of council doing the relocations on this site. This was done by the church, is our understanding. This is where the records are very poor, but we do know that council, the then city, did not do this relocation on this site.
okay, all right, very good.
There are a lot of different perspectives on what happened, so we try to stick with just factual statements, and no, I did not write this, just in case you were wondering. Legal didn't do this. But I think it's a fairly brief statement of what we know and what is reflected in the city records. The city records do reflect that we established a new cemetery in North Greenwood for African-American burial site. There's also records that state that there, at some point, there was expansion of the road and I think special assessments, but that is all in the report. This is not an attempt to summarize the report that has been issued. This is just basic information.
Councilman Beckman, do you have something else?
Yeah, so when it says, and the City of Clearwater Council established a new African-American burial site, you're saying we did not move them, but we established a site.
We established a site in North Greenwood. We did not do the relocations. Nor does it appear that we paid for these relocations. In the North Greenwood, when North Greenwood Cemetery was moved, we did pay for those relocations. We do not appear, from our records, to have been involved in this.
Okay.
And then, do you know what the phrasing had become inadequate means?
No, I don't.
Okay, any other questions? Consent?
You can't, because I have to recuse myself
Okay.
on Thursday, so neither of these can be on consent.
Okay, we'll talk about it Thursday.
6.6,
Approve staff request to vacate an alley located within the Clearwater Gas Complex at 777 Maple Street, described as all of the platted alley lying within Block 10 of Jones subdivision of Nicholson addition to Clearwater Blocks 7, 8, 9, and 10, as recorded in Plat Book 4, page 82 of the Public Records of Hillsborough County, with which Pinellas County was once part, and pass ordinance number 9434-21 on first reading. Mr. Brizak again.
Mr. Horn. Robert Brzak, Real Estate Services Coordinator. This ordinance vacates the platted paper alley in the gas plant complex that was recently discovered when we were replatting the gas complex and isn't needed for municipal use. City staff recommend vacation of the alley.
questions?
No.
Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, why did this get moved from the January 19th work session?
For advertising issue.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Other questions? All right, we'll talk about that further on Thursday, 7.1.
Approve a future land use map amendment from the residential suburban category to the residential urban category for 2250 Nursery Road and pass the appropriate ordinance on first reading. Ms. Clayton.
Good morning, Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. At your meeting a couple of weeks ago, you had asked that the property owner let staff into the property, so I thought that this morning my comments would be centered around what I saw. I personally went along with Ken Peaslak, our Code Compliance Manager, and Nilda Espinoza, who is the original Code Enforcement Officer on this property. So I'd like to show you some photos just for context. And if anyone is interested, I also have the actual construction plans for that addition that might help us understand if you're interested.
So Gina, can you just give orientation for everybody?
Sure, this is on the north side of Nursery Road, east of Belcher Road. It's a couple parcels down from the intersection, and this site involves the home there that you see, as well as the fence and that building behind it. This is a picture from Google Street View showing that at one time there were 4 mailboxes at this property. This was the most recent photo on Google Street View, and it was from 2019. I will say when we went out to the site on Friday, now there are 2 mailboxes. I think this here is the building that's really in question. The house that you saw at the front is in fact a single-family home. We did go inside, we did verify. So this building has what was on paper 1 unit and then a lot of storage. As you can see, there's an RV and a lot of other things stored behind these large doors. Mayor, I don't know if this is too much information, but I do have these if you would like them. And the applicant provided these to me, so they just pass these.
Thank you.
Is that 1 or 2?
2.
Okay. Let's see here. So on the first floor of the unit, it's kind of a shotgun type design. And according to the plans, this is supposed to be great room, dining room, and den. What we found there was 1 dwelling unit with some folks living there, a retired couple living there. And so it's really not being used this way. It has a bedroom, and it's not really attached to what goes up on the 2nd floor. I think this is where I really want to focus on. So this is the 2nd story, and when you come up the stairs in this hallway, this is a door. So this door has a lock, and it has a peephole, and then you go in there, and there are two rooms. There are some kitchen cabinets, but there's no evidence of an actual functioning kitchen. There's no stove, there's no sink, nothing. In fact, I can show you the photo, and no one was
So where the walls are currently in this blueprint or
okay, so
schematic don't even exist?
Pardon me?
Because you said there's 2 rooms.
Well, the rooms are here.
Okay.
So you take this door, and then there's a room here and a room here. So essentially, this space, you go through a door that has a peephole and a lock to get into. And then the same thing here, there's another door that you can see has a lock and a peephole. Bottom line is no one is living up there, and there's no evidence of a functioning kitchen or a bathroom. And this space here is called out as bedroom 3 and 4. It is being used as storage, as the son-in-law, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, indicated. No one is living there, so I think today it's being used as one unit on the bottom floor. I think it might be questionable based on peepholes and locks, how those units on the second floor were used, but now they're definitely not being used. And technically, I'm sorry, Mayor, technically they wouldn't even be a unit because there's no kitchen and bathroom in those spaces.
And so that lower level is with those garage doors, that's being inhabited.
No, it's the unit, if you, go back to this picture, the unit is really, over here.
Right.
Right, and all of this is storage. There's an RV in there.
Okay.
There's all kinds of
Okay, I got you.
things in there.
All right. So Vice Mayor and then Councilmember Hamilton.
Gina, how many meters, electric meters are?
There are 2, and I actually, this is the back of the building, and you can see there were 2 over on the back of the building. And Mr. Hilkert came to the site, and he said that he keeps his RV refrigeration going. I mean, I didn't go, I saw the RV, but, you know, that's what he said. He keeps it running regularly, some refrigeration in there.
Other questions from you? No. Councilmember Hamilton?
So we've answered the code enforcement questions. I'm still a little, because of a technicality, the city had to, basically walk away from $500,000 in liens, I guess, or, but that is what it is. And my understanding is the property owner's intent is to scrape all this clean, is to scrape this site clean to build new townhomes, correct?
That's what we've been told. We don't have any plans to that effect, but Mr. Hilkert did reinforce that.
Ms. Aiken?
Does that include the single-family home or just this
Yeah,
unit?
the whole property.
Whole site?
Is what he has said.
That was not clear to me.
We, well, I should say, he said he wanted to build townhomes on the site, and based on the number they talked about, that would require the whole property to be scraped.
And I know the neighbor to the north, Mr. Metz, is objecting to this. When you were on the site, how much buffering and visual, how much can you see from one property to the other? Is there a lot of vegetation and whatnot?
There is. In fact, I walked back here and walked along the fence line that's behind here between this property and Mr. Metz's property, and it's very densely vegetated. I mean, you can see through in a couple of, if you kind of peer and you look, but it's pretty private.
And if we were to approve the new development of the property, redevelopment of the property, our code requires a certain amount of buffering and vegetation between the two properties since they're different classification, does it
Well,
not?
they're different zoning districts, but they're both residential. So we don't have a specific buffer between residential and residential. We do have setback requirements that would apply. Based on what they've told us they want to do, that's going to require CDB public hearing, and we're going to look very critically at that site plan to ensure that there would be adequate space, buffer, and all. But there is nothing called out in the landscape code between residential and residential.
But there is, through the process, there is an opportunity and there will be an opportunity for all of those things to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? So on Thursday, this is going to be the last bite of the apple that we're going to get on this. It won't come to us, if this is approved.
Right.
Back to Councilmember Hamilton's statement of the technicality on the code enforcement. I don't think this individual's been a very good neighbor. to those who are adjacent. And I don't think that they've been following the rules of the city, which makes me a little reluctant. At the same time, I think the buildings that are currently on the site are unsightly. I mean, we're going to talk about this further on Thursday. But this, I think, is a good example of a bad example. And so it gives me reservation. But, Mr. Horn?
Well, I was just going to say, Mayor, in the past, the staff has gotten embroiled in conflicts between the two families. The Metz family lives in the unincorporated county, and the Helker family, of course, lives in the city of Clearwater. We have really, in the past, been challenged to try and avoid, picking sides and, acting appropriately. We could not have access to the property for quite a while, until Gina went.
Until they wanted something.
And so it's been challenging, to say the least. But I just wanted the new council members to know that there is a history of conflict.
And I think some of us know both families, so.
Yeah.
But the new council members may.
Right. Councilmember Beckman?
Well, and, there may, I certainly believe you that there's a history, but at least from my information here is, we've had 4 years of code violation notifications and fines accruing over $500,000. As Councilmember Hamilton said, it's tough to walk away from that or let somebody just, get away with that. But I think we need to look at how that occurred and what we're going to do to not let 4 years of that tension between neighbors and fines accruing continue on without knowing what's going on and stopping that,
If I could, Mayor.
Yes.
We, maybe 2 years ago, adopted the lien foreclosure program, and so prior to that, we really didn't have a mechanism to deal with these cases that had huge code enforcement liens. And you have recently approved some foreclosures that we have done. I am not at all defending the situation. I don't think we have ever collected the entire amount of any code lien that was due to the city. I think recently one of the highest we ever collected was $100,000 on almost $1 million worth of fines. So from that standpoint, I don't think that that's unusual. What is unusual would be how the property changed hands to a trust and then the county misfiled it so that we ended up with this technicality. And of course, if the property owner had let us in on the property back when all this was going on, perhaps those fines would not have even been accrued if we had been able to determine that, in fact, 2 units upstairs were not really being rented out.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Clayton. 7.2.
Approve a zoning atlas amendment from the low-density residential district to the medium-density residential district for 2250 Nursery Road. Pass the appropriate ordinance on first reading. Ms. Clayton.
I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Same property, 8.1.
Authorize the award of invitation to bid number 11-21, vehicle uplifting services to Enforcement One, Inc. of Oldsmar, Florida, in an annual not-to-exceed amount of $250,000 for a period of 1 year to include 2 one-year renewal terms at the city's option, and authorize the appropriate officials to execute same. Mr. Kunzen.
Good morning, Perry Conzen, Fleet Manager. This invitation to bid's primary use is for new vehicle upfitting with occasional modifications to existing fleet vehicles. Each department will be responsible to budget the funds necessary for their upfitting needs.
Questions? See that there was only one responsible bid. Were there any irresponsible bids?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Consent?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, 9.1.
Appoint
I'd like to see Mr. Parashino. He's been on the list and also is involved significantly in the city through a number of different avenues.
I can support that.
I would too.
I'm fine with that.
So am I.
Consent?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on the COVID proclamation or any of the second readings?
No.
Okay. 10.5, we're continuing that. And then 10.6 was denied. 11.1,
Mandalay Channel update. Mr. Ed Chesney is going to explain all those interesting results.
I'll try. I'm going to put this up here if we can get a shot of it. Okay, this is a result back in November, I believe. We got direction to investigate some of the bottomlands and the water quality underneath the boats that are moored out in Mandalay Channel. So we procured Dive Tech, which is a local dive team here in Pinellas County that we've used before. I actually went with them for this exercise. It was a 6-hour exercise on December 21st. So in the photo here, you can see this is the Beach Rec Center right here. This is Island Estates here. And we went out and we dropped clay buoys at these locations. This is about a 325-foot cross section. And we got GPS coordinates for each of those locations. After the buoys were set, the first thing we did was some groundwater samples. We took 2 samples at each location, one at mid-colony, the mid of the column of water, and one at the bottom to include some of the organic material at the bottom. So part of your package also were some analytical results that showed the locations. They were called north, middle, and south. And then the lab results came back, and you'll see the results: 12 CFU, 13 CFU, 12 CFU. What's a CFU? So I'm reviewing these these results. So that is a colony forming unit. That's what the lab is looking for. So still trying to make heads or tails. What that means, I called the Healthy Beach program in Tallahassee and talked to the guy that actually does all the water quality samples for Clearwater Beach, the other beaches, and some in the county. I said, well, what does that number mean? And he said, well, it's a very low number. He said, that is in that recreational zone, so there's no red flags there. And I said, well, when would it approach a high number? He said, if you were seeing numbers close to 400, that would be a high number. So this is kind of like a background number, which is what he felt. And I said, well, do you think you could see higher numbers if people were discharging and such there? And he said, well, you would if it was a constant discharge. It would stay in the area, but things that are flowing in and out or weekly, daily, after midnight, I don't know. But the results were we had very low numbers for water quality. So that's a good thing for Mandalay Channel. So then secondly, after we did the samples, we went to each location, and the diver went in with a 50-foot tether, and he circled in a 100-foot diameter, and then came in 10 feet until he got to the center again. The visibility was low. I have all the data that they sent me, but their report was, and every time they came up, I said, what did you see? And he said, the diver I talked to before he went out there, and he said, well, we dove this area for Duke. It's a pretty clean area. So underneath these boats, the only thing that they could report, now they don't see the natural bottom, they note they only see the soft bottom because there's a lot of mud that flows through that area and sits there. They found a white plastic chair which could have blown off somebody's dock or boat, a wooden oar, but no debris on the bottom. And, you know, we knew what we were looking for, and we just didn't see that. So in summary, there was nothing of note in these 3 sections. I feel that the coliform that we saw there is background at best because there was no large numbers that would indicate any kind of a spill or a continued release. And that was really what they were telling me up in Tallahassee. So if you have any other questions, or I'll try to help answer those.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, so I guess I'm kind of shocked that we have such low, just from all the people that have been there that thought that we had some issues. So 12 out of 400 is very low.
Yes, I was shocked as well.
Also, I wasn't shocked on the visibility. I guess, did they have, I know they spent time on each section doing video. I figured they probably wouldn't get much on that because it's just not real clear. But did they find no mooring concrete or anything on some of these boats? I know one of the things they were looking for was maybe some actual mooring concrete pieces down there.
I mean, they could see there where they were anchored off, but they didn't.
Just anchors.
They didn't consider that debris. If somebody was tied off or had a line down there, it could have been on concrete. I don't know that, though.
Okay, all right. All right, that's it.
Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, so I have well, first of all, how did we choose these 3 sites that looks to me like they're relatively close to each other?
I selected those. I went within the moored community there and went just north of them, one in the middle, and then one at the end. What you see there now, this area is a few years old, so there's different boats, more boats. So to dive, we cannot dive underneath a boat unless we make contact with the occupants on the boat. That's kind of like a diving thing. There were people on the boats asking us what we were doing. They thought we were out there to set mooring balls for them, and they were interested in signing up if they could, right that day and time. And I told them we were doing, underwater, investigations and such. But I selected the locations and tried to get them with the tide and, upstream, downstream, and so forth.
So it was my understanding, and, that we wanted to do this to kind of find out about fecal matter and that, right? And so, we have a little bay boat just for fishing, and we don't have any kind of, bathroom facilities, whatever you call it, discharge stuff. But do we think that people actually discharge right there in front of everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't think there's any doubt. I think,
There's no, yeah.
They don't ever call for a pumping boat to
Well,
come
I mean,
and
they
clean.
don't like go out in the middle of the ocean and do it where nobody's watching.
They never
some
move.
of these boats never
No,
move.
they have.
Oh, those are the ones, all right, so we're talking about the ones that are moored here and their discharge. Okay, so that's kind of why you went there. Because I'm thinking, well, you didn't go over by, the Marriott on Sand Key or, some different places as you truck down towards.
It was just Mandalay Channel.
Because of those boats that have been moored there. Okay. Because when Councilmember Hamilton talked about, traveling around in the bay there, that, you said it's really polluted and.
I'll be the first one to say I'm shocked by the numbers. I was expecting much more, but what that also tells me is this area is getting much better flushing action through tidal movement than I thought it was getting, because that's to me the explanation. I mean, when you've got boats that never move and there's never anybody pulling up next to them to pump out, and you got it there, you can go on to VRBO and rent it, and yet nobody goes out there to pump it. It's going somewhere. It is absolutely going somewhere. And, this tells me that, the Mandalay Channel is getting better flushing action than I thought it would, but I still think it could be better if we got Dunedin Pass opened up. But
Amen.
That's a whole nother story.
Amen.
It's a whole nother
I'm ready
fight.
to pursue it again.
That's another fight.
We've got the Speaker of the House up there right
Yeah,
now.
you never know.
The water clarity was so much better back in the day. It's a shame.
And the diver was putting his hand out. I mean, I was on the boat. It was a sunny day. We could see the clarity there. It wasn't good, but you could see his hand. You could see the bottom. You could see his tether. But there was no debris on the bottom.
But was clarity because of weather conditions previously? I mean, last week when we had
Yeah.
the high winds, I mean, the bay was all churned up. I mean, it didn't look very nice.
And we
and that's the
selected-
way it is.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
we selected that day based on weather.
Okay.
Because it took us a while. It was about 2 weeks, and each week the diver gave us a window, because that's what they do. So they don't want to go and waste their time in the water. So this day they selected, and I worked with them on that morning.
Well, I think we ought to just chalk this up to no news is good news to an extent. It is a shame that they probably are discharging. I don't think there's any question of that, but I think it was worthy of doing the investigation. Councilmember Beckman and then Vice Mayor.
How close did you get to those boats? You just said you can't go under them because it's some,
You can go under them if they're aware you're there. If
Okay.
the boat is not occupied, you don't know if they're just inside, and then somebody could start an engine.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to have your diver under the boat, so. A lot of the boats had people on them, and they were watching what we were doing, so we
Yeah.
told them we were in their area.
yeah.
So we were under the boats that we could go under.
Okay, so under. So I mean, if they're discharging or whatever, it should land pretty close to there unless it's some big,
Well, it would
tide going out
expect
and
some
all
of it
that,
to
yeah.
drift, that's why I kind of did the,
like were you within 3 feet, like an arm's distance of some of these boats that
Yeah.
are, okay.
Vice Mayor?
Well, at least we have a baseline now to go by.
I think so too, yes.
And that's what we needed before, so I'm glad we did this. If we have problems in the future, we got something to look against and go from there.
One last thing, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So this weekend when I was doing my work for the agenda, there wasn't a narrative attached to all this data. And like you, I'm like, I don't know what this means. So I'm part of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and also reached out to Tampa Bay Water Keepers. That's a nonprofit that advocates for water, environmentally clean
Quality.
water, whatever quality, yeah. And didn't hear back on what those numbers mean. So I still would, even though you're telling me they're great and 400 is, worrisome, if I could at some point have a chart that says, these are the ranges, this is, green, yellow, and red, and, whatever, some perspective of how high can it go? What's the maximum?
Well, again, when the lab results come in, the lab doesn't tell you what you have, they give you your results. So we didn't hire a consultant to do the work, it was done in-house, so I did what I normally do, I reach out to the people that I work with on the state level. So I talked to a gentleman, and he assured me that these were low numbers, but I could get something, he talked about what they sample, we were just looking for fecal coliform. They do a lot more sampling for other things as well, that's more expensive, so there are other tests. And that's why I was confused, because the research I was doing, I was getting lower numbers, like under 35 is good, more 35 to 70 is moderate, and he said, no, those are different types of testing. Then he directed me to this colony forming unit test, which is what they use for the bacteria, and then to make it, if it's recreational water, can people ski in it, can people swim in it and not be affected? And 90% of those that are not health-wise wouldn't be affected, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chesney. Appreciate that. Mr. Horn, anything else from you?
No, Mayor.
Ms. Aiken?
No, sir.
All right, any new business from the council that you would like to schedule? I would like to invite Principal Masterides from Clearwater High to come and give us a presentation on what to expect at Clearwater High. You've probably seen some of the construction fencing going up on Gulf to Bay on the north side of the property, and Clearwater High finally is going to get the remodeling that it deserves. And I think it would be great for all of our citizens and ourselves just to get informed about what that's going to look like. So is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, also, it's my understanding that through this process, they're going to also be resurfacing the track and the football. Clearwater High will be the first public high school in the county that will have an AstroTurf football field.
Right.
When it's done, so that's good. And I think the county will then make the effort where each other schools will get converted as time goes along. And one other if we're moving on from that, but I fully support having Principal Master Rice here. I heard this morning, I haven't gotten verification of it, but I think it's great news that they have gotten over the final, the full $10 million number for the county and the city of Dunedin to move forward with the county. Last I heard, they were about 275,000 short. My understanding, I haven't got verification, my understanding is they've exceeded the number, and I think that's great. The Hackworth property is, going to be a great nature park for the county, but everybody needs to also understand, if you live in the city of Clearwater, you pay part of your tax bill to Pinellas County, so that is your park as well. These, county parks are your parks as well. Your money's going to those, so feel free to enjoy them.
It will be a great addition, and it's very kind of those private donors to step up and make a contribution. So with that, we will adjourn. We'll see you all on the 4th.